this episode of the podcast, we are talking about why everyone should have a reading goal. Reading is so beneficial, both for your mind and your character. So how can we prioritize reading this year? Well, by setting reading goals. Today, we are going to talk about some benefits of reading and why you should set a goal for this year. I'm also going to give some great recommendations for your next favorite read. Welcome to A More Beautiful Life Collective
podcast. We know that in the hectic hurry of everyday life, it's easy to lose sight of what really matters. This is a moment to pause and realign your focus on the one who gives us peace and rest. We're focusing on discipleship, productivity, and homemaking as we live with eternity in mind. This is the place where you'll learn to create a life you love and cultivate your heart for God. I'm Casey Fletcher. Thanks so much for joining me.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 28 of A More Beautiful Life Collective podcast. We are already in February. Can you believe it? And not only that, we're right about in the middle of February. There's a commercial that I saw recently that said that the second Friday in January is known as Quitter's Day. And I looked it up and it is a real thing. Quitter's Day has come and passed. So how are we doing on those New Year's resolutions? I think the best way that we can keep going on all of our goals is to continually keep them in front of you to make sure that you're checking back in on what you wanted to accomplish this year and just try to think about ways that you can keep going, keep the momentum going. One of my goals this year was to cultivate my reading life. That's a goal that I have each year. And so in the last episode, we talked about why pursuing mother culture and pursuing reading is so important. If we want to live a life that cultivates contagious delight in our homes and in our communities, we need to prioritize the pursuit of what is good and true and beautiful. And so a key step in pursuing mother culture is to read. You should read often and read widely and read deeply. Read for comfort and read to expand your horizons. Reread your favorites and read outside your comfort zone. Read for knowledge and also read for fun. One of my favorite ways to start the day is cozied up under a blanket with a cup of coffee in my hand and a book on my lap. Generally, I take a book with me wherever I go, and I listen and watch people who are readers, and I always check out their recommendations for the best books to read to add to my to-be-read list. Reading, just like all great hobbies, becomes a lifestyle that affects your life. Now, why should you read? In a culture that values technology and productivity above all else, reading is frequently pushed aside and sometimes even mocked. Our thinking is getting shallower as we jump from site to site and video to video or scroll through the shorts and reels on our phones. We can see the effects of this kind of content in the shortening of information over time. So we've gone from books to movies to TV shows and now to shorts and reels. Why should we break the mold and participate in this countercultural act of reading? Well, some of the benefits of reading include better social skills. Reading helps to develop empathy and foster connection with perspective taking while teaching social skills and allows for rehearsal of universal experiences. So basically, with reading, you're able to try on other people's experiences, which helps you to understand them a little bit more. You're able to put on their shoes. It also helps with stronger mental processes. Reading, it strengthens cognitive processes by activating different areas of the brain. So it can also improve memory. It also improves knowledge. Obviously, we read to learn, and it can help build background knowledge as well as improving language and vocabulary and writing and conversation skills. Anything with words, it improves. And it also reduces stress. Reading for as little as 6 minutes can decrease your stress by up to 68%. It also improves sleep. It's the best way to wind down your day. So the act of reading has so many benefits. It simply is a healthy habit to have, just like exercise and getting enough sleep. Setting reading goals will help you reap all of these benefits. Now, importantly, we've talked about why the act of reading is beneficial for us. But does it matter what kind of things that we read? Does reading a BuzzFeed article have the same benefits as reading Shakespeare? There's a difference in the language between popular fiction, which most popular fiction is written at a 7th grade reading level, and the classics of the past. The difference will affect vocabulary and other skills gained from reading the book, so that is a difference in what we're reading. But I think the difference also goes beyond this utilitarian approach to reading. Reading matters because stories matter, knowledge matters, and the past matters. The Literary Life podcast, which I'd recommend to anybody, has made it its mission to revive a culture of reading that's based on an older understanding of stories and their importance. They did an interview recently with Jason Baxter, who just wrote a book called Why Literature Still Matters. And they emphasize the importance of deep reading to engage with ideas that change us. So reading, it develops our love. And so when we read what is good, true, and beautiful, we become those things because we become what we love. One of our reading goals should be to read great literature that changes us, that provokes us to the pursuit of that good and true and beautiful life. So our reading goals, I think, should be to read great books. Today, the marker of a good book is often something that's a page turner. When reading, we just want to get through a book, get it off our list, and add it to our reading goal number. But the act of savoring, it's something that's fading away. But truly great literature, it desires to be savored. In our enjoyment of the story, we don't want it to end. And so we're content to move slowly and encounter greatness. I was just reading a book, which I have not read the series. I haven't proofread or anything, so I don't know if this is something that you should read, but I just started Brian Sanderson's book, which is like a massive tome. It's like 800 pages. I've not read anything by him yet, but I was thinking as I was reading it, I was like, wow, this is kind of flipping between different characters and all this kind of stuff. I was like, this is such a long book. Is it worth the read? So I went and I got on a Reddit forum and to see, just what other people say. And somebody said the same thing. They were like a third of the way through the first book and they were like, is this worth the read? And all of these people were saying, well, you just don't understand. This is something that it desires to be savored. This guy, he's wrote, I don't even know, it was like 20,000 pages or something, because I think there's 10 books in the series. And they were saying it's like, it's an epic fantasies of epic proportions, and you need to take your time and read it. And if you do, several of these people have read through his books multiple times. And so I think, we need to remember that sometimes in our rush to check a book off the list, we're maybe, we're not enjoying it to the fullest extent, and we're not getting everything out of the books that we read because we're not savoring them. So what types of books demand this type of reading? Often it's the great books of the past, the classics. Reading itself has its benefits, but there's a lot of junk food out there today. And when we solely rely on the junk food of reading, we're going to find ourselves in an unhealthy state of mind. Not all books are worthwhile. And a lot of times if you go on Book Talk and you're looking at some of the things that people keep recommending, a lot of those books are not worthwhile. Yeah, they're a quick page turner and they're entertaining, but it's not something that you want to be the thing that is developing your palate. Just like you don't want to develop your children's palate on craving Little Caesars pizza. Yeah, every now and then that is what you're going to eat because that's just the way life is. But if that's the thing that they think is the epitome of greatness, of great culinary expertise, it might be something that you find later on is not going to serve them because they're not going to be able to enjoy good food, whether that's homemade food or good food that you find in a restaurant. Not all books are worthwhile. And when we read things that are filled with messages that are counter to what we know to be good and right, we're often going to find ourselves veering off the good and right path ourselves. We have to use discernment in our reading. A fast-paced book that makes us want to keep turning the page is not a marker of what a good book is or what is worth reading. Instead, a worthwhile book is something that, 1, inspires us to both a greater love of God and man, 2, forces us to turn our inner gaze onto the good, true, and beautiful things that makes us want to contemplate those things, and 3, changes us to become more good, true, and beautiful ourselves. Books, they should change our character, not just because they help us to empathize with others, which is a common argument for reading today in elementary school, grade schools, but instead because by interacting with them, we learn the right way to be. I think this is why we have to read books that are written with the influence of a Christian culture. And I'm not talking about Christian fiction books that you find in the bookstore today. Some of those are just sanitized twaddle. Really, what I'm talking about are books like, Anna Karenina and Crime and Punishment. They are both gritty novels that show you what you do not want to be like. They dwell on the darkest parts of mankind, but they also point us what is good and right, while showing us the cautions of veering off the right paths. And we can find these books, we can find them in all cultures. But I think one of the things that in Western society that we have is that we have a society that was built with the foundations of Christianity, very much so up until, very recently. And so if we read these classic books of Western literature, we're going to see some of this Christian mindset that comes through. But obviously reading everything just with discernment and engaging with those ideas, you're going to see traces of that common grace, of that good, true, and beautiful life in books from all different cultures. So if you want to cultivate your reading life and get tips for that, I have several posts on the blog that you can read, and so you could check the show notes for that. But some tips to read more are: 1, don't get stuck in a book. 2, always keep a book close by. And 3, try to read a few pages in a book every day, and that'll get you through a lot more books than what you think. One of the best ways to read more is to set a reading goal for the year. There are a lot of different options for reading goals out there. You could pick several books that you just want to get through in that year. You could also do a reading challenge based on the topic of the book, or you could pick a reading challenge that someone's already created. Reading goals are beneficial because they help you pace your reading. So if you know you want to read 52 books in a year, you know that, okay, I got to read a book a week. And so instead of scrolling one night or binge watching a show on Netflix, you pick up your book and get it done. You also are pushed to read more widely. I think most reading challenges, unless you're doing just like the number of books, they give you different types of books to read. And so they kind of get you out of your comfort zone by maybe reading something that you're a little bit unfamiliar with. And they also help you to connect with others. When you set reading goals, you can also cultivate your reading life, but somebody else's, by doing like a book club or by just talking about what you're reading. And so that can be a great way to keep going and keep motivated with your goals. Some options for reading goals, like I said, is 1, you could set a number of books you want to read this year. So 52 books is probably the most common. I think that's a great place to start. Or you could start with 12 books, 24 books, or even 104 books. I have a 50-book reading coloring tracker on the blog. If you want to check out the show notes, you can get that and print that out. You can also pick a few topics you want to read this year and read widely about that topic. So the best example of this type of goal is from the Scolay Sisters 5x5 reading challenge. They have 5 different topics and they try to read 5 books about each of those topics. And so by that point, after you've read 5 books about a topic, you're going to really understand it pretty well. And so this, if you are interested in a topic like Christology, we've talked about that on the blog. If you're interested in it and you want to learn more about that topic, reading 5 books on the topic will really help you to dive into that. Or even something like homesteading, you could read 5 books on this. You could also choose a reading challenges with lots of different types of books to choose from. I made a book bingo challenge that you can get on the shop or in the show notes. And there's also a blog post that links to a lot of other different reading challenges to choose from. And then there's lots of book lists that you could choose. If you go to the blog, you'll find an example of book lists for preschoolers and children. So I have a book list from A Honey for a Child's Heart that's linked, and also a book list for 80 books to read by age 12. You can also find some book lists for adults and more mature readers. And there's some great recommendations. So Honey for a Woman's Heart by Gladys Hunt. She has great recommendations there. Book Girl by Sarah Clarkson. And there's also several books that I've made a book list for that you can look on the blog and find. So to give you some recommendations for what you could add to your reading list this year, this is my 2024 reading recap, plus my top 5 books for 2024. So I actually did very well on my reading goals. Normally, I use Goodreads to track my reading, and you can friend me there at Casey Fletcher, and you can see what I'm reading right now. Again, I read all sorts of different things, not just theology books, but I do read quite a few theology books. So just disclaimer if you follow me on there. Normally, I set my goal on Goodreads for 52 books, and last year I ended up reading 97 books. So a lot more than what I was planning, and it's just because I follow those tips. I don't get stuck in a book. I try to read a little bit every day. Right now I have 5 books that I'm reading in the morning, and I read 5 to 10 pages out of each of them. And again, if I do that by the end of the year, that's 52 books right there if I just stay consistent, because generally that's 5 books a month, because most books are between 200 and 300 pages. So if you read 10 pages a day, you'll finish a book in a month. And so if you read 10 pages out of 5 books a day, you'll finish that at the end of the year. So I think it's just important to kind of take that method of just a little bit every day. And so these are my top books that I read last year. The first one was Becoming Elizabeth Elliot by Ellen Vaughn. This is a beautifully written biography of Elizabeth Elliot. It was inspired by Elliot's story, but Vaughn also kind of adds some of her commentary in, and really and truly it just strengthened my faith, and it encouraged me, but it also didn't gloss over some of the things that were struggles for Elliot's life. I also read another biography called The Fellowship, which was the literary lives of the Inklings, which is Tolkien, Lewis, Barfield, and Charles William. Really and truly, I think most of us, we love the stories of Tolkien and Lewis, either on the book or on the big screen. And I remember Lord of the Rings, honestly, is still one of my all-time favorite movies. But I have not really read too much of what the Inklings have written. I've read quite a bit of C.S. Lewis, but not so much the other ones. But this book, it gave me such context for their life and so much to think about, because they were all very much Christians, and so they thought about good and evil, and it makes me yearn to have my own little group of Inklings myself that meet and wrestle with these topics of theology and life and art and literature. It's just something that really inspired me as well. The third book that I read was The Liberal Arts Tradition, A Philosophy of Classical Christian Education. This was also a really great book as it pertains to the different philosophies of education, but also just with life as we look at the classical method and what was valued in the classical method. It gives you an overview of classical Christian education, but it does so by really diving in deep to the things that you learn, which really is what does it mean to be a person of virtue and character, which is the point of Christian classical education. But even if you are not planning on homeschooling, I think it's a way to redeem your own education to pursue that virtue and character through what you are learning. And so that was a great book. Then the fourth book was Mere Motherhood by Cindy Rollins. She is a homeschooler. She has a Charlotte Mason podcast, and she's written some other things. She's also on another podcast. And really, this was just a lovely memoir of a homeschooling mother. She is coming to the end of her road of homeschooling, where her kids are all grown and flown, and now she's kind of going into that grandmother stage. And she's written another book called Beyond Mere Motherhood. But this book, it is very much a real picture of what it's like to be, this homeschooling mother who goes through these various changes in life and kind of all of these things that you have to face. And it really just puts it into perspective what the most important thing is. And so I really like that one. And then my last one that I had not read, but I just so enjoyed, I had not read this one before until this year, was Anne of Green Gables. This was something that, of course, lots of people, they're like, oh, I read these and, they're my favorite books growing up, but for some reason, I just never read them. And I thought the book was charming. And I think that's the best way to describe it. It just makes you long to be a part of the world that she's living. And interestingly, with her, she gets this classical education that I've been studying through her book. She talks about learning Latin and about, this kind of schoolhouse environment. And so it's just something that it's fun to kind of see that written out on these pages and, the ways that she kind of grew and changed through her education and through obviously the family that adopted her. I think this book is an excellent example of Lewis's saying that no book is worth reading at the age of 10, which is not equally and often far more worth reading at the age of 50. So if you've never read that book, I would suggest that you go read it because it's very good. You can also read, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe too, which is what Lewis, was trying to do with his books is to make a book that was worth reading as a child and as an adult and to enjoy it just the same. Some honorable mentions that were worth reading, even though they didn't make the list, they definitely speak to the current events and are worth the read, is Glow Kids, How Screen Addiction is Hijacking Our Kids and How to Break the Trance. We've talked about screens before on this book, but the author, Nicholas Carderas, he really focuses in on the negative impacts of screens. And so you'll find in that book a lot of the things that we've echoed on the podcast as far as screen time goes. I also read Bad Therapy, Why the Kids Aren't Growing Up by Abigail Schreier. And this is another one that is just, you'll read it and you're just going to feel, I don't know, it's just, you feel sad for the world that we live in. It definitely speaks to this anxious generation and why, this kind of talk therapy where we ruminate on all of our problems is actually negatively impacting us. It's not helping anything. And then the last book was The 100-Year Lie, How to Protect Yourself from the Chemicals That Are Destroying Your Health by Randall Fitzgerald. And this is a book that speaks more to our food and the things that they put in our food. And it's an older book as well. It's not as current as the other two, but it's something that really, I think, speaks to just being mindful of what you're doing whenever you are purchasing your food, where you're getting it from, what's in it, looking at the ingredients, which is definitely something that is being spoken about in culture today. My reading goals for 2025. So I was originally going to set my reading goal at 52 books for the year, but because the past few years I have read 80 books, at least 80 books, my goal I think is going to be to hit 100. We'll see if that happens, but I've been reading quite a bit this year. I've been trying to be consistent and reading every day for those pages. And so I think I might be able to do that, but it's something that I've never done. At the same time, I also want to complete my AMBL book bingo challenge. You can download the challenge on the shop at amorebeautifulcollective.com/AMBL shop. This challenge, it has place for older literature, so reading through 16th, 17th, 18th century literature. It also has read a book that's a travel book, read a book about theology. And so I think it's just something that'll help me get kind of outside my comfort zone where I'm not just reading the same things. I also have a Shop My Shelf challenge where I'm going to try to read through quite a few books on my TBR stack, which is very large. And I want to try to read through some of those books and kind of whittle down what is worth reading and what's not. So I'd love to hear your reading goals. You can comment below and let me know. Be sure to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. And don't forget to leave a rating and review wherever you listen. This helps others find the show. You can also get any of our reading trackers, challenges, and logs on the shop, as well as a whole bunch of other resources to help you live that more beautiful life. If you've enjoyed this post, you can also consider donating to support the show. Until next time, keep creating a life you love and cultivating your heart for God. I'm Casey Fletcher, and I'll see you next week. Bye.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of A More Beautiful Life Collective podcast. If you haven't yet, please leave a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts to help others find the show. While you're there, you can like and subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Don't forget to check out the blog and our store for more encouragement and resources on how to create a life you love and cultivate your heart for God. I'm Casey Fletcher, and I'll see you next week.